What's up, Scyushi Squad? We are back in some more Trove, continuing the 36k series. Just barely, like seriously, my Dino Tamer is seriously lacking. I think that's just because his gem isn't like fully augmented. But then on top of that, we also are just rocking a C1 gun and a C1 ring. Unfortunately, I don't really have anything better for this class. But that doesn't necessarily mean that what we're going to be talking about today is going to end up being irrelevant, which is going to end up being how the class is going to end up handling itself in U10 as well as the delves. Now, there is something that I do gotta mention. I am well aware that the new update coming is going to kind of, in a way, it makes these videos irrelevant just because this high amount of power rank is going to end up being superseded by an even higher amount of power rank with crystal gems and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean that these videos don't still have their merit. And so I'm trying to finish up the 36k series. And then when the new update ends up coming out, I won't have, like, this will be off my bucket list. And then I can start slowly working on grinding up a set of good physical and magic gems that I can then end up swapping to all the classes. And then we can end up going through all of them at a much higher power rank, which, generally speaking, as of right now anyways, this is going to end up being some of the strongest damage you're going to end up seeing in the game. Not necessarily with the Dino Tamer specifically, but just this series. Like, that's what it's about. It's kind of a flex video, but not necessarily for me and my power rank or anything like that. It's most of all just showing you guys, okay, this is how powerful this class can be. Is your main worthwhile, you know? So last time we ended up touching on the gunslinger, and it was okay. It wasn't great, but I gave it a lot of slack, and generally speaking, I wasn't playing it 100% efficiently. I did mention that in the video with some of the gear that I was using and stuff, but this time we're going to do it right. So this time we're going to be using the Lunar Lancer subclass ability, and then we're, for the most part, using pretty good sets of gear. Now, the whole thing about the Dino Tamer is you want to have this sucker on cooldown at all times. So attack speed, movement speed across the board. Ignore that extra stat of health regen right there. That's just because But most of all, we're going to be focusing on using our ult as efficiently as possible pretty much all the time. So we would end up just using it, and the mount on this costume is a slime ball, which is hilarious. And then we're just going to end up going in and probably mopping the floor with the enemies that we end up coming across. Because if we, I almost forgot to stop my timer too. We actually got into this video really quick comparatively to the other classes. But that's just because I thought that we would rather talk about it on the go. So Dino Tamer has actually always been a really good class. Lots of people kind of underestimate it, and the class can end up being one of the fastest in the entire game, actually, just because if you end up having your pyro disc pop off and everything else end up popping off, generally speaking, you can have heaps and heaps of movement speed. My buddy Nintendo has always advocated just how good the Dino Tamer can end up being for speed build, because he actually mained the Dino Tamer for quite a while. So that's how I know, oh, this is a class that you don't want to end up messing with in terms of speed. But what goes into a speed farming class? Well, there's two things really. There's going to end up being the time to kill, which is very important. That's going to end up basically being how quickly we can end up destroying enemies, which you can see we are handling just fine. You know, generally speaking, if there's ever an enemy that's strong enough to even outlast us for even a short amount of time, all we gotta do is just throw down our net, and then everything will die, like, no matter what. That's just how the Dino Tamer is, okay? And the class also has a lot of survivability, as we'll tackle a little bit more when we end up going into the delves. But generally speaking, the class is going to end up having the survivability because you can end up bouncing up and staying in the air. Excuse the lag, that's just the name of the game. Trove is actually, its real name is just the lag game. But anyways, the other part of dungeon clearing and speed farming more particularly is going to end up being the travel time within the distance of one dungeon to another. So how quickly can you end up moving from point A to point B, right? And the Dino Tamer is perfectly capable at this if you end up having all of your abilities end up popping off. It's a little bit laggy, unfortunately, so a lot of my abilities aren't working as effectively as they should. The other thing, too, is you'll notice that, unfortunately, with the Dino Tamer, you are very reliant on your jump stat. So if you don't have a decent enough amount of jump, generally speaking, it's going to end up taking you a while to get to. You won't be able to handle U10 dungeons, frankly speaking, if you don't have enough base jump stat, just because your jump stat is quite literally helping. You can see it's really helping me get into all of these dungeons and stuff. Good Lord, the lag is just intense, dude. Now, fun little bit of trivia for you guys that you probably don't really care about, but you know how the Dino Tamer, you can't actually glide with its ultimate ability? Well, once upon a time, the developers actually ended up showing a gliding animation with the Dino Tamer's ultimate ability in a live stream. This was back when Tryon Worlds was in charge of Trove and not completely bankrupt. And for some reason, they just never really implemented it into the game. So I don't know if Game Ago even can implement that into the game, but I think it would be great if they did. This right here, though, hopefully this is just, no, this isn't lag. Yeah, this is one of the big problems that has always been with Dino Tamer, that I honestly, I assumed at this point it wasn't still in the game. But you get stuck in your ult animation, which is absolutely stupid. I don't know if there's any way for us to end up getting around that, but it kind of makes a moot point of actually using this class, just because then we basically have to start spamming flasks just for the simple fact of getting into our ultimate again. If they end up ever fixing that, well, that would be awesome. Again, I'm a little bit flabbergasted. I'm just kind of shocked because I thought that was out of the game. That's something that has been in the game ever since the Dino Tamer ended up becoming a class that was playable. That's how badly that is. That's like, devs, seriously, what are you doing, man? What you doing to my boy Dino Tamer? Fix it. So anyways, we'll just move on and pretend that nothing ever happened, right? Unfortunately, we are really getting low on flasks right now because of it, but hey, whatever. As far as speed farming is concerned, I think it's pretty safe to say that aside from the lag, we are handling U10 brilliantly, and that's something that we can always say about the Dino Tamer, is just that the class ends up doing this really well. I kind of messed up on this dungeon, unfortunately. You know what? This dungeon sucks anyway, so let's just get out of here. There's so many dungeons in U10 that are just irritating, isn't there? Like, man alive. I don't know why I have a turtle mount. That must have been the last time I was on this class, was showing off one of its costume packs or something. Okay, you know what? It's too laggy. Let's go to the delves. Seriously, man. At the end of the day, I just wish that I could end up going to an offline server just so I can show you guys this. But my God. So we're going to be going into depth 119. And this is where I can end up elaborating a little bit more on the Dino Tamer's survivability. Because Dino Tamer has always been a very good damage dealer / survivalist. It's not that the class is necessarily very tanky or anything like that. It's just the fact that we can stay up in the air while throwing our net down, and that will end up giving us the survivability that we need. This is something that was true even back when Shadow Towers was a thing in Trove, because you would essentially end up just jumping up in the air like a freak, like this, and nothing can touch you. Obviously, you know, ranged enemies are going to end up being a bit more of a problem. But generally speaking, if you're careful and if you make sure that you dodge correctly, you can usually end up dodging all of the ranged attacks as well. But here's a little bit of an example. So you kind of got to zigzag a lot. Unfortunately, these enemies have generated with an immunity to magic damage, which is hilarious that that's even a thing in this game. What about these guys? No, they don't have it. So most of all, I just gotta end up being really careful and cautious with dodging their ranged attacks and so on and so forth. It's most of all just trying to dodge last second, because unfortunately the way that Trove works, it's very odd to explain. Did our ult break again? No, there we go. It's very odd to explain, but the enemies, the ranged enemies in the game will actually 100% home in on where you're going. So if you are holding left, when an enemy shoots a projectile, it's going to hit you so long as you keep holding left. So essentially what you have to do is you gotta kind of change your direction constantly. So you gotta hold left to bait out one of their shots, and then in the middle of their projectile going over to where you're going to be, you gotta change your direction. Unfortunately, just so many of the enemies, like the ranged enemies, just attack so frequently. So, you know, you gotta kind of maximize the volume of your movements to 11, right? But anyways, now that we can already see Dino Tamer handles this absolutely flawlessly, no problem. Dino Tamer is actually really good for the delves. Not only just because of the sheer survivability, but you're really good for helping your teammates as well. You wanna know why? Because your net actually acts as a snare. It will end up snaring enemies, which can end up being invaluable to a lot of group activities when you're in the delves. So personally speaking, I gotta give a gold star to the Dino Tamer just because he's your boy, and he's always ended up being your boy. Now we're going to end up swapping off Trailblazing to Arcane, because yes, that's right, I wasn't even using Arcane. I didn't have to, and I was able to take all those enemies on no problem. Let this be a comparison to the Gunslinger and how far it has fallen, because even though I didn't end up having all of the perfect gear and everything like that on my Gunslinger 36K video, I am actually even less prepared on my Dino Tamer, and we're performing better. Anyways, let's kill this thing. So we're gonna end up using up all of our dino babies. I gotta make sure that I have my net down on the ground. If you're ever fighting an enemy and you want to have the survivability, again, you would just stay up in the air, but we don't really need to do that. Most of all, it's just about spamming our flash so that we can end up having our arcane go off over and over again, and then just make sure that we can end up using our ult at any point in time. But as you can see, this guy's kind of one-shotting me, which is kind of a good thing, because if I have enough flash that I can end up constantly outlasting him, it means that he is going to end up triggering my flask emblems rather than me having to even bother, just because I can basically just wait for him to kill me over and over and over again with death defying. And as you can see, no problem. Dino Tamer absolutely insane in terms of the end game content. This is a class that I've never really dedicated a full amount of time to maining. I have mained it in the past, and I think that the class is a lot of fun. However, one thing that you might have noticed is I wasn't really using my dino babies that much, and that's because unfortunately they're just really, really weak. Now, there is some hidden ring effects that you can end up using on the Dino Tamer that kind of bring your minions up and ultimately will end up just giving you more damage, which is always going to end up being a good thing. But we'll end up talking about that when we end up getting into the video where we talk about how you're going to end up building the Dino Tamer. But I'm really pleased to be able to see that the Dino Tamer has not really fallen too far from its branch. You know, it still ends up being a comparable class to some of the heaviest hitters in the game, save for the fact that the ultimate glitches out sometimes. That still is a detrimental problem and something that we shouldn't be dealing with in the Trove of today. Anyways, thanks for watching. Smash like, sub for more, buy the merch you want to support the channel, and have a wonderful day, everybody.